Star Wars: The Adventures of Serian Kall. Book 1: The First Steps. The following story you are about to listen to is non-canon to any and all mainline Star Wars media, though is intended to fit in either continuity. This story is set in the year 24 BBY, 2 years before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. The series is an entirely audio-based listening story. And furthermore, I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. The bright orange sun loomed over the cityscape horizon of the utopian city world of Coruscant. A new day had ascended. Cluttering the dawning airways, speeders and airbikes thrust in traffic, honking and wailing in endless strife. The towering buildings that spread on endlessly gleamed against the sunlight, flashing streaks of light across an endless, dark, industrial swamp. And at the center of it all stood one lone building, a fortress strong and mighty in its presence. This sanctuary, which loomed large, was as famous as it was mysterious. The Temple of the Noble Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice across the galaxy. It was here within this temple that stories of destiny unfolded, where tales of light and life spread out, reaching the far corners of the galaxy from where darkness lurked in its crevices. Stories that have lasted the test of time and space, many of which have expanded into myth and fable. And yet here, right now, within the Jedi Temple at this early morning, one young man's story is just about to begin. Within the archives of the Jedi Temple, in the quiet halls of study, a young man sat by himself at a quiet desk in the far corner, his hazel-brown eyes fixed on the datapad in front of him. From a wanderer's glancing look, he wasn't much to look at. Standing at a relative medium height, a slim yet dexterous physique, brown hair short in length and ungracefully cut, he wore a set of mint green colored robes with a tan undertunic, a brown utility belt, brown boots, and a simple, nondescript hilt of a lightsaber attached to his belt. Upon his datapad, pages of text that extended downwards. All around him, holobooks of all kinds lay flat, projecting titles of countless variety. The Science of Lightsaber Construction, Tales of Light and Life, The Chronicles of Nomi Sunrider. His name is Serian Kall, apprentice of the Jedi Order. An introvert who would rather spend his days in the solitude of the archives as opposed to the unpredictable nature of the galactic frontier. One who is trained in the arts of battle and war, yet pleads each day that he may never use them. He is one to seek the great adventures that lay upon the horizon, so long as he may be able to turn the page. Because Serian has been blessed with a great gift, known to many, yet honored by few. A gift he shares with his brothers and sisters within the temple, the gift of perceiving the Force. And despite the incredible privilege bestowed upon him, his affinity to harness such a gift within him remained stagnated, a temperate pause that stung at his abilities. For the talents of manipulating objects with the mind that came so easily to most took him so much more effort, a disfinity that left him doubling his efforts in training and faltering in performance. His shortcomings, a breed of insecurities that consumed his judgment, fear that his failing abilities might prove more problem than solution at best, and at worst, become a detriment to those in his service to save, perhaps even worth the cost of a life, a cost he could not bear to pay. From his seat, Serian felt the vibrate of his datapad as a message popped up on his screen. Activating it, he read a salient request. Temple Courtyard, 10 minutes. Serian took a deep breath, already concluding the message's intent, and pondering his next course of action. Stretching in his seat, he forced himself to rise, nearly patting out the folds in his robes and collecting his belongings. Upon his travels back to his quarters, Serian took a moment to admire the place in which he called home, the true honor that had been bestowed upon him in his earliest years. The lavish gold statues and ravishing stone tiling that coated every nook and crevice within the temple. He looked around at all the other Jedi Knights that roamed these great halls, some just returning from lengthy missions far off, and others just waking to the early morning. These days, more and more Jedi headed out of the temple, sent off by the Council to help settle the continuing spiral of more systematic conflicts. Though he had seen much of the galaxy in his travels along with his master, he hadn't truly seen the breadth of just how much tension the galaxy was now plagued with. And for every part of him that wished to leap across the stars and help solve every problem known to man, there was a fraction of his mind that wished he never would get that opportunity. After returning his belongings to his personal quarters, Serian made his way to the temple's courtyard. The brisk morning air sent an instant waking shock through his skin, the slim chills of wind brushing back locks of his hair. Stepping out, he made his way towards the Uneti tree, one of the last remnants of natural life an industrial planet such as this had to offer, and radiant in its connection to the Force. The moment remained calm, peaceful even, disturbed only by the constant sounds of engines and honking of speeder horns. All was as it should have been. The sudden hiss of a lightsaber quickly broke the relaxed moment. Serian immediately jumping, the ignition of the weapon roaring into his eardrums several moments before his senses fully kicked in, as a cloaked figure leapt towards him at a spiraling thrust, protruding an emerald haze blade straight towards his chest. Immediately sidestepping, Serian, in the heat of the moment, snatched his own lightsaber from his belt, quickly throwing it up and igniting the sapphire blade just in time to meet the next incoming overhead strike, the two blades binding in a fierce lock. "You could have given me a heads up, Master." "Your enemy certainly won't give you the opportunity of preparation. Besides, it's hardly more fun." With a shunt of muscle, Serian found himself pushed back, immediately forced into the defensive position as his opponent came at him, unleashing a vicious yet vicious mixture of quick strikes, jabbing thrusts, and elegant flourishes, all driving the young man back, who could only hope to block every strike sent his way. Any slip-up, any falter in his guard could leave him open to a strike with the potential to kill or take a limb. From the outside perspective of a watching Jedi, such an intensity in training would be considered brutal or needlessly extreme. But training under the great Jalius Serian demanded only the best from the students he trained. In quick thought-up counter, Serian switched his defensive guard in between strikes, bending his stance towards a thrusting joust, lunging his blade forward, sending his master into a guard before twisting his wrists, locking the two blades together. Taking advantage of the present moment, Serian threw himself forward, planting both of his feet against his opponent's stomach and ricocheting backwards, sending his master stumbling several feet, presenting a well-needed opening. His master quickly threw himself to his feet, changing his stance from a serpent-like angle to a high guard. In response, Serian shifted back to his primary stance of the Surisu form, the style of combat he had studied and mastered over the course of his apprenticeship. The two spent a silent pause, pacing around each other, awaiting the other's next move. Serian was forced to react first, watching as his master jumped into the air, amplified by the Force, and swung his blade downward in the motion of an overhead strike. Realizing that it was a futile attempt to meet such power head-on, Serian sidestepped, positioning his blade accordingly as his master came down to the ground, unleashing the forefront of his power into a now pointless attack. Taking advantage of the moment, Serian struck his blade outwards, redirecting the remnant power from his master's strike and sending him stumbling into a sidestep. The present opportunity allowed Serian to throw himself at his master, unleashing his own offensive hack-and-slash blade work, cutting and cleaving at his master's guard. Jallius blocked and parried every incoming strike with an effort that made it seem as if any of Serian's attempts of attack were little but fallible. The seeming inefficiency of his efforts soon shrouded into a cloud of doubt that swept over Serian's mind, leaving him with pause in the middle of his onslaught. Promptly picking up on his apprentice's falter, Jallius permitted Serian's next strike, before quickly and harshly grabbing his arm. Never focus yourself on your enemy's effort. Do not relent for a moment. Complete your efforts of defeating them regardless of difficulty. Every moment of hesitation you give way to doubt in battle can and will cost you. With an aggressive heave, Jallius launched Serian over his shoulder, throwing him backwards as the young man smashed into the stone tiling of the courtyard in a heap. There was hardly any time to recover, as Serian soon found his master spun around, pointing his blade directly at his throat. The tense moment ceased after a few moments, as Jallius deactivated his lightsaber and placed it back on his belt, extending a hand to help Serian up. Don't ever doubt yourself, Serian. You did well. I was hoping so, especially with no warning at this hour. I'm sure you are already well awake with your studies in the archives. Warming up my morning with some easy reads is one thing, Master. Getting a lightsaber swung at me and my head smashed against stone is certainly another. Jallius took a moment, turning to examine the back of Serian's head upon the comment. You don't seem to be bleeding, though it would still be wise to check in with the medical droids in case of a concussion. Yes, Master. Standing together, Serian saw the expression on his master's face turn from a cold yet concerned gaze to a warm and loving smile. A smile filled with so many emotions it seemed to blow away any internal voices of doubt his head might whisper. His name is Jallius Serian, Jedi Master of the Order. Seasoned political advisor, delicate and veteran warrior. Nicknamed the Sabered Tongue by his closest peers and friends for his mastered skills in negotiation and political diplomacy. And Serian Kall's Jedi Master. To state his personality as intense was an understatement in the largest variety. To consider his training efforts extreme was common by all those who knew him. And yet for all the hardship his training and work brought, it was an effort built upon an unyielding love, because Jallius Serian's truest power, more than any force power he knew amidst his repertoire, nor any sequence he could perform with his lightsaber, was his ability to love. His love for his order, his republic, his students, his peers, his friends, and that love would not permit him to rest until he assured their stability. His training may have seemed cruel to some, but it was not born of cruelty. He would put his students to the test against every possible situation a Jedi could face, so that he could rest easy knowing his students were prepared to deal with each and every one of them. It was both his greatest triumph as a master, and yet his greatest burden. Standing together, master and apprentice took a moment to admire the beautiful crimson sky of dawn, the wind blowing gently against the great Uneti tree, and the endless traffic that littered the streets, taking in all that was this world, and all it inhabited. You know, Serian, there comes a time where I will have nothing left to teach you. I'm starting to believe that day is approaching rather soon. Master? Not sure I understand. I've taught you nearly every trick I know in the book. You've just now reached 20 years of age. I think you're ready to take the first steps into the world beyond. I believe it is time for you to begin your Jedi trials. The trials? To knighthood? Serian remained in disbelief upon hearing such proclamations. I don't believe it. I'm not sure I'm ready. I am certain for you, my boy. You have come a long way since I first took you as my apprentice. and you have worked to no end to master your skills. There is little left that I can teach you. But Master, I'm not sure I can even be a knight. I can't feel the force the way others do. Jallius turned to look at his apprentice. His words weren't entirely incorrect. Serian's connection to the force had been considered delayed by his earliest instructors. Many of his colleagues had been surprised by his choice to take the young boy as his Padawan. But as Jallius knew, any student could have power, lift dozens of stones without breaking a sweat. But the truest students, the ones who truly became accomplished, were the ones who understood when and why those stones must have been lifted in the first place. It was a spirit of heart that Serian possessed, more so than most Jedi his day. It is no secret that you have had to work nearly double the most for your successes. But if anything, it speaks all the more highly of how hard you have worked, and how far you are willing to go in the name of justice. Maybe. I'm just not sure. That is what the trials are for. To make the sure assessment for you. I know. I won't let you down, Master. I know you won't. Now, if your head's still hurting, I think now you should check in with the medical droids. Right. I'll be going, Serian responded, rubbing the back of his head where he had landed. Swiftly, he turned on his heel and made his way out of the courtyard and back inside the temple. Watching on as his apprentice departed, Jallius allowed himself a moment of expression, his face morphing into a proud smile. And then, in the blink of a moment, that smile faltered, growing cold for just a brief pause before withering away. On the planet of Utapau, dawn had only just begun to crescent the horizon. In the depths of Pau City, tucked safely within his personal chambers, Governor Lom Frickett paced tirelessly, his fists clenching uncontrollably as he listened to the broadcast playing on his television. The sounds of a rousing speech followed by thunderous applause, a sound that should have been something to celebrate, so long as one didn't stand opposed to such a victory as in his case. Rubbing his forehead to soothe his increasing aches of stress, Lom moved over to his holoprojector, typing a few buttons on it before the image of another Padawan dressed in lavish clothing appeared before him. A tense pause of silence lingered between the two of them before the man on the projector spoke. The situation is not as bad as you think, Lom. Explain how exactly it could get worse, Lom growled, gritting his teeth as he spoke. Blom's already won over half the city with his last speech. It's only a matter of time before he sways the wealth as well. The wealth will only flock to his side so long as he has something he can offer. Right now, Blom has nothing but fancy words to keep him going. When they realize that, they will cast him aside and the populace will learn to do the same. Until I can fulfill my promise of Project Silencer, I have nothing to present to the shareholders. So far, Zahol has failed to keep up his end of the deal. I've been telling you that for months now. Zahol is nothing more than a greedy puffer pig. He's been stringing you along, and will keep doing so until you put your foot down. I don't exactly have much power to do anything right now. Not with this election happening. Not with the public's eye watching so closely. I will go and ensure Zahol is in his place tomorrow. For now, try to relax and focus on working a good counter against Blom. Thank you, Marum. Suddenly, Lom's attention was startled. The sudden sound of something shifting unnaturally provoking his attention. I will call you back, he said, deactivating the holoprojector, forcing his face to remain expressionless against such a delusional paranoia. Still suspicious, however, Lom moved over to his desk, opening his drawer and pulling out a heavy blaster pistol. Spinning around, he scanned the entire room, aiming his weapon. Show yourself, he spoke aloud. His command was retorted by silence. As the heat of the moment passed, Lom lowered his blaster, forcing himself to take a deep breath. to rid himself of such fantasies that cluttered his mind. He already had so much on his plate to deal with. His own anxieties could not override them. Turning back around, he went back to his desk and prepared to return the blaster and go to bed. In the sudden heat of the moment, Lom found himself grappled by an unknown assailant, a burning cut tearing open through his back as he screamed in pain. Looking down, he noticed a vibro knife aimed just under his throat. Retaliating, Lom threw his head back, striking his opponent, whose guard briefly released and dropped the dagger held at his throat. In the heat of the moment, Lom spun around, raising his blaster to take a shot at this assassin. The figure grabbed the weapon with their free hand, lifting it away from them, and it was here that Lom got the slightest glimpse at who had dared come for him. The figure was cloaked, few distinct features to be seen, especially through a face-covering mask and goggles. The only true point of interest that Lom could notice was the figure's dual montrals hanging from their head. The figure gripped Lom's hand, squeezing against his bone as he desperately held onto his weapon, unintentionally firing a blast that shot straight into his roof. The figure yanked the blaster from his grip, grappling Lom in one hand while attempting to thrust their remaining dagger through his stomach. Lom caught the incoming blade with his free hand, weak yet determined to maintain the struggle. In the blink of a moment, the mysterious attacker raised their free hand from the grapple, extending it outwards. No sooner did the disarmed dagger lying on the floor suddenly begin to twitch and hover, before flying into the free palm of the figure and stabbing straight into Lom's shoulder, as the other thrust in his stomach. In agonizing pain, Lom collapsed to the floor in a heap, bleeding out and already fading. The last thing he saw, the masked figure standing over him as if a Goliath, bending down towards him as they thrust their dagger into his chest, over and over and over and over again, as everything